Have you ever wondered why your grandfather saved stale bread just in case, while your father accumulates objects he never uses and you collect digital experiences that vanish into nothing? Why your mother can't throw anything away because someday it might be useful, while you can't commit to anything because there's always something better waiting? Why when you hear certain family stories you feel a strange echo, as if you had already lived them in another life? There's something unsettling about the way the same fears, the same obsessions, the same patterns of self-sabotage appear over and over in families, like ripples in water that extend across decades. Your great-grandmother who didn't trust banks, your grandmother who couldn't express affection, your mother who sacrificed her dreams for security, and you who flee commitment as if it were a contagious disease. These aren't coincidences. They're invisible inheritances, as real as the color of your eyes or the shape of your smile. Modern psychology has discovered something ancestral cultures always knew, that we carry in our being not only our own traumas, but the emotional ghosts of those who preceded us. Like archaeologists of the soul, we excavate layers and layers of unprocessed pain, truncated dreams, decisions made from fear that became silent mandates for following generations. Your inability to relax isn't just yours. It's the echo of your grandfather, who worked himself to death for a family he barely knew. Your fear of abandonment wasn't born with you. It's the shadow of your grandmother who was abandoned by her mother during the war. But here's what's most disturbing. Most of us live these inheritances as if they were absolute truths about ourselves. We believe we are the ones who can't trust, who can't love, who can't prosper, when in reality we're performing a script written decades before we were born. We're unconscious actors in a family play that has been performed for generations, with the same dialogues, the same conflicts, the same tragic endings. Psychologist Carl Jung observed that what is not made conscious in one generation is transmitted to the next as destiny. Your parents didn't just bequeath you genes. They bequeathed you their way of seeing the world, their survival mechanisms, their strategies for dealing with pain. If your father learned that expressing vulnerability was dangerous, he taught you, without words, that being strong means being alone. If your mother believed her value depended on how much she gave to others, she transmitted the belief that love is earned through sacrifice. What's fascinating and terrifying at the same time is that these patterns operate at the most subtle levels of our existence. They're not just conscious behaviors. They're ways of perceiving reality, invisible filters through which we interpret every experience. Your family gave you lenses to see the world, and for years you've assumed that distorted perspective was objective reality. That's why certain types of people inevitably attract you. Why certain situations repeat in your life like constant déjà vu. Why you feel trapped in cycles that seem bigger than your individual will. Imagine for a moment that each family is like a river. The current that reaches you has collected sediments from each previous generation. The uncried tears of your great-grandmother, your grandfather's contained rage, your parents' silent resignation. You aren't just you. You're the mouth where all those waters converge. And just as a river can change its course, you can transform the current, flowing toward future generations. But before you can change something, you need to see it clearly. Most of us live blind to these patterns because they're woven into the very fabric of our identity. They're so familiar they feel normal, so omnipresent they become invisible. It's like trying to see the water you're swimming in. Only when you get out of it can you recognize you were submerged. There's a reason why certain phrases from your parents resonate in your head decades later, why certain situations trigger disproportionate emotional reactions, why you feel strange familiarity with pain you technically never experienced. Your nervous system carries imprinted traces of traumas that aren't yours, but that your body recognizes as its own because they were transmitted through the most intimate connection that exists, the relationship between parents and children. Think about this. Your mother, when she held you as a baby, wasn't just transmitting warmth and nutrition. She was transmitting her emotional state, her stress level, her way of inhabiting the world. Your father, with every gesture, every silence, every explosion of anger or moment of tenderness, was sculpting your belief system about what it means to be human. They didn't explicitly tell you life is dangerous or you can't trust anyone, but every fiber of their being communicated these truths, and you absorbed them like a sponge. Generational patterns operate like inherited software programs. Your great-grandfather developed a survival program during the Great Depression. Scarcity is dangerous, accumulating is safe. That program transmitted to your grandfather, who adapted it to his context, but maintained the essence. Hard work is the only guarantee. Resting is dangerous. Your father inherited a modified version. External success compensates for internal insecurity, and you received the updated version. If I'm not constantly producing and improving, I have no value. Each generation believes it's doing something different, that it's overcoming the mistakes of the previous one. But in reality, it's executing variations of the same fundamental program. Your mother swore she would never be like your grandmother, that she would never sacrifice so much for others, but ended up sacrificing in different ways. Perhaps for her career instead of her family, or for social causes instead of specific individuals. The content changed, but the underlying structure remained intact. My value depends on how much I give. This is the first crucial revelation. What you perceive as your individual personality is, to a large extent, a complex combination of adaptations developed by previous generations to survive their specific circumstances. Your perfectionism isn't a personal character flaw. It's a survival strategy inherited from an ancestor who learned that mistakes had devastating consequences. Your difficulty trusting isn't unjustified paranoia. It's an alarm system calibrated by generations who experienced betrayal or abandonment. But here's the turning point. The moment when everything changes. Once you can see these patterns as inheritances rather than absolute truths about you, you recover the power of choice. You're no longer victim to mysterious forces controlling your life. You're the conscious heir of a complex legacy you can honor, transform, or transcend. Imagine yourself as the archaeologist of your own family. Each compulsive behavior is an artifact that tells a story. Your inability to say no is the broken vessel of someone who learned that rejection equaled abandonment. Your need for control is the rusted tool of an ancestor who lived chaos as existential threat. Your difficulty receiving love is the inherited shield of someone who was hurt when they allowed themselves to be vulnerable. When you begin to see these behaviors, not as personal defects, but as transmitted survival strategies, something fundamental changes in your relationship with yourself. Self-compassion replaces self-criticism. Instead of asking, "Why am I so neurotic?" until you begin asking, "What is this part of me trying to protect?" Instead of fighting against your patterns, you begin dialoguing with them, understanding their original purpose, thanking them for their protective intention before deciding if they're still useful in your current context. Family therapists have documented how certain traumatic events can skip generations, appearing not in direct children, but in grandchildren. A grandfather who never spoke of the war may have a grandson who suffers inexplicable nightmares about battlefields. A grandmother who lost a child and never processed the grief may have a granddaughter who develops extreme anxiety every time her own children move out of sight. It's as if unprocessed pain seeks an outlet, a vessel in future generations where it can finally be recognized and healed. This transmission isn't just psychological. Increasing research suggests traumas can alter genetic expression in ways that are inherited. The field of epigenetics is revealing that our ancestors' experiences can literally change how our genes express themselves. Children of Holocaust survivors, for example, show specific biological markers related to stress, despite not having directly lived those events. Your body remembers traumas your conscious mind never experienced, but if trauma can be transmitted, so can healing. Each generational pattern you recognize and transform doesn't just free you, It frees future generations from the need to carry that weight. When you learn to express emotions your family kept repressed for decades, you're not only healing your own capacity for intimacy, you're giving your children permission to feel fully without fear. When you break the cycle of perfectionism that has tortured your lineage for generations, you're not only recovering your right to error, you're teaching future generations that human value doesn't depend on performance. Think of it this way: you're standing at the intersection between your lineage's past and future. Backward flow all the decisions, traumas, dreams, and fears of those who preceded you. Forward will flow everything you choose to do with that inheritance. You can be the unconscious link that simply passes patterns without examination, or you can be the alchemist who transforms the lead of ancestral pain into the gold of conscious wisdom. The transformation of generational patterns doesn't occur through force or repression. You can't simply decide you won't be like your parents and expect that to be enough. Transformation requires first deep recognition, then radical compassion, and finally, a sustained practice of consciously choosing different responses to the same triggers that activated previous generations. Imagine each generational pattern is like a familiar song that has been sung for decades. Your grandmother sang the verse of silent sacrifice. Your mother added the chorus of excessive responsibility. You've been humming the bridge of guilt for existing. But now, for the first time, you have the opportunity to change the melody. You don't need to throw out the whole song. It may have beautiful elements worth preserving, but you can modify the parts that no longer serve, add new harmonies, change the tempo from constant struggle to the rhythm of acceptance. The first step is developing what psychologists call mentalization. The ability to observe your own mental and emotional patterns as if you were a scientist studying a fascinating phenomenon. When you feel the familiar compulsion to please others to the point of exhaustion, instead of automatically following the impulse, you stop and think, interesting, there's my mother's pattern. Where does this impulse come from? What is it trying to protect? Is it useful in this specific situation? This conscious pause is where freedom lives. In that space between trigger and automatic response, you recover your power of choice. You're no longer a robot executing ancestral programming. You're a conscious human being choosing how to respond to each moment based on past wisdom and present reality. The second movement is radical compassion toward previous carriers of these patterns. Your father didn't teach you to distrust because he was evil. He taught you to distrust because someone deeply betrayed his trust, and he developed distrust as a survival mechanism. Your mother didn't transmit anxiety from cruelty. She transmitted anxiety because she lived in a world where constant vigilance was necessary for safety. Each dysfunctional pattern was, in its moment and original context, a creative solution to a real problem. When you can see your ancestors not as perpetrators of your pain, but as human beings who did the best they could with the emotional resources they had, something transforms in your relationship with inherited patterns. Resistance becomes curiosity. Resentment transforms into gratitude for their protective intention, even when you recognize those strategies no longer serve you. The third element is what we could call conscious reparenting. Becoming the parent your nervous system needed but never received. This doesn't mean denying or criticizing your real parents. It means recognizing that as an adult, you now have the capacity to give your inner child the emotional responses it didn't receive. If you grew up in a home where emotions were dangerous, you can learn to validate your own feelings. If you grew up where love was conditional on performance, you can practice loving yourself regardless of your achievements. This conscious reparenting is perhaps the deepest work a human being can do, because it not only heals your own system, but interrupts transmission of the dysfunctional pattern to future generations. When you learn to console,